Good evening and welcome to The Square. I hope everyone's here is off to a great start. Also, welcome to the first edition of The Square, the first show of the year. Our conversation tonight is going to focus on youth entrepreneurship in 2021. We're going to look at entrepreneurs, our guest entrepreneurs, and hear from them on the challenges and milestones that they faced last year, especially during the start of the COVID pandemic and throughout the year, as well as expectations that they have in the coming year, in this year, 2021. Joining us today, we have with us, and I'm very happy to see these guests with us. We have Liban Mugabo, who is the CEO of Safe Gas Rwanda Limited. Liban Mugabo, great to have you on The Square.
Pleasure being on the show.
Great. We also have with us Alan Kendunga, who is the founder and CEO of Talent Match. We're going to hear more about that later on tonight in the show. Alan, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us, Diana.
Great. My name is Diana Mpisi, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by The Square resident panelists. And seated very far away from me tonight, we are joined with Charles Haba. Charles, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Same here, Diana. Happy New Year, and how are you?
Good. Happy New Year to you too. And we're also usually joined by Brenna Namata, who's unable to be with us tonight, but I'm sure she'll be joining our social media feed as we progress on the show. As we always do before we kick off with the conversation, we're going to have a midweek highlight from the Square resident panelists. And Charles, I'll ask you, is there something you'd like to share with the viewers that has caught your attention this far in the week?
Obviously, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we did pledge to our viewers that would always be having a highlight around COVID. And it's just befitting that we talk about the new measures. Personally, I'm not shocked. I'm extremely bothered that the cases are rising quite a lot. I don't want to be in the shoes of law enforcement because it's very difficult to police COVID. But at the same time, I don't want to be in the positions of people who the Minister of State for Health was talking about, having to strike a balance between allowing businesses to work, health to go on, health services to go on, and the Minister of Trade was talking about businesses surviving. So that's a very, very thin line. My biggest concern is really around the way in which we communicate. And that's one of the areas in which we haven't done extremely well.
What do you mean exactly in terms of
So I'll give you an example. Cabinet meetings go until late in the night. The resolutions are released past midnight, and they're expected to be implemented the following day.
The same day, actually.
Same day, literally. Yeah, you're right, Diana. So I think in as far as the COVID period has been concerned, effective communication has been a bit elusive for our system. I think it's an area they can definitely improve, and give people, even if it's 24 hours, because the collateral damage of actually having to crowd people, you increase the chances of the virus spreading, whereas you can give people 24-hour notice and say, starting tomorrow morning, don't go to this area, do whatever you're doing within the next 24 hours. I think that's an area that needs improvement. Still, along those lines, it's very painful that we are losing a lot of people. I did follow a very sad story of a frontline health worker from Rawagana district who passed on. May her soul rest well, which basically comes down to one thing, and the individual care that we need to take. It's not us against police. It's not there's nothing against the government has against us. It's just that COVID is real. It's taking our people. It's taking our lives. We need to be super careful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of the lady, she made the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes.
Frontline essential care worker. She'd worked, for 15 years. In the health, as a health practitioner, so absolutely my soul rest in peace. And also, you mentioned the concept of a 24-hour transition. I've always thought the same thing. I think you saw videos on social media of like hordes of people who are crossing from one district to another because the regulations, resolutions were announced within that same day. So I think it's definitely something worth thinking about.
Yes.
So Liban and Alan, great to have you on the show once again. We're here because from time to time, we always have discussions, not only about the private sector, but also dealing with, other than policymakers, but with entrepreneurs, people who are in the private sector themselves. And we thought it just fitting to kick off the first show of the year, understanding, from an entrepreneurial perspective, the milestones, the challenges, as well as the expectations you have for this year, 2021. I'm sure everyone is hoping that it's going to be better than last year, but we're very happy to hear from you. We're very happy to have you with us. So if you could just kick off by just telling us about your businesses generally, and I'll start with you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Diana. For those who don't know me, I'm Alan Kendunga, and I'm the CEO of Talent Match. And what Talent Match does is building capacity, especially among youth. And we work closely and mostly with university students. So you find us on university campuses. We collaborate with different institutions like, the Chief Skills Office at RDB to make sure that students who are graduating from schools are prepared for the market. So we have different programs that we do both on campus, but we also do outside of campus to engage with employers and what's happening on the market to make sure that the people that we're preparing, we're actually preparing them for the market, and we understand the problem on the market. Yeah.
And how long have you been doing this?
So officially we started last year. Now I'm still in 2020, but we started in 2019. That's when we officially launched, the whole registration thing. But I really started getting involved in the space way before, when I was still at university. I started in 2016. So I've been involved personally, but the business itself started in 2019.
Thank you very much. And I think what you're doing is something that's very necessary, preparing our university graduates or university students about to graduate for the job market in Rwanda. There's a huge gap, and I think what Talent Match is trying to do is fill that gap. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more. Liban, great to have you on the show once again. If you could also just tell us more about what Safegas Rwanda does, and also about the plant, the LPG plant that your company recently opened last year amidst COVID in Nyamata district.
Thank you very much, Diana. Safegas is an importer, market and distributor of LPG, basically liquefied petroleum gas. It's one of the substitutes in terms of cooking fuel. If you look at Rwanda and the current trends, basically we are basically felling more than 380 hectares of trees every week, just to fuel our as a major source of our cooking energy. So now moving forward, hopefully through Safegas and other companies along the same lines or in the LPG space, hopefully we're looking to correct this. Of course, in the process making money, but trying to build it as a business that is taking care of all these environmental issues that we're facing today. I mean, the current space is relatively new. This is our 15th business, but the growth in this space is tremendous. So we're basically taking it day by day. In terms of our cylinder manufacturing plant, we fully finished everything. We are testing some of the machines, and we look to roll our first made in Rwanda cylinders in the next few, not more than a month or so.
Okay. And if you could just tell us more about, you launched, this cylinder plant, LPG plant was set up in September. This was really, when COVID was going strong,
Yes.
Was really hitting even harder than when it started in March this year. So how did you go about doing that? What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you actually manage to set up such a major investment? It's a $7 million investment during the pandemic.
So such kind of an investment took time. We had planned it well in advance, so we had enough cushion from a reserve standpoint, and of course we had both aspects of debt and equity, but to a larger chunk we were relying on our equity. So what we did is we started the project, commissioned the machinery from our suppliers, and unfortunately they came at the time of COVID. Actually, we had a period where we had to freeze construction and all that kind of work. So over time, but again, remember this is investment that we had planned in advance. So we did not, and again, when COVID started, nobody had an idea of how long it will take. So I think this continuity is what we're seeing as a major problem, but I think we are used to dealing with shocks, especially this part of the world. So, but again, we had already the bet was there, we were moving on forward, and as the lockdown continued, we began feeling a pinch, but again, the business that we're in, which was already in motion, kind of bailed us out.
Absolutely. And what about you, Alan? You know, Talent Match is very front-facing. It's people-centered. You're working with youth, preparing them for the job market, so you're also working with corporate potential employers. How did this work last year when there was lots of restrictions and movement, and there was lots of social distancing, there was a lockdown, curfews? How did you manage, how did you navigate during this period with Talent Match?
Yeah, you're right, Dan. The space that we are in is very dependent on movement and people, and also on other industries actually growing. So we depend on other industries' growth, and and so the pandemic, actually when the pandemic hit in March, we were actually in the middle of one of our cohort trainings, because we normally do cohort trainings where we take university graduates and we take them through a rigorous training process, mostly focusing on soft skills. So when the pandemic hit, we were in our third week of the training, and we were at a phase where we were actually going out to go visit companies, what we call industry insight visits. And these are meant to open up the industries to students and graduates, to open them, to allow them to understand more about what companies do, what the industry space looks like, and what opportunities are really available. So when the pandemic hit, we were at that stage. So you can imagine everything was disrupted. But what the pandemic taught us, even though it disrupted us, was how do we pivot faster, and how do we continue to serve the students that we were serving, because most of them had to travel abruptly back to their homes, those who were in Kigali. So we had to find a creative way of engaging them, and thanks to tools now that are allowing us to be able to stay in touch, we were able to continue to stay in touch. But obviously that part of our programming where we have to go out and meet companies was disrupted. And companies were not hiring, some were firing. So it was a difficult time for us, because there were some employers who were already in the pipeline saying, we want you to train these students, and after you train them, we want you to pass them to us for internships and other opportunities. And all of them put their their plans on hold, which was a big disruption in what we're doing. But it didn't discourage us. During that time, we really sat down and thought about how do we go after, how do we go beyond this, even when there's a pandemic, even when we are in a lockdown, how do we continue to engage our students? So we would make sure that we have activities going on with them. We would make sure we give them assignments, research things to work on, just to continue to engage them on the skills that we're trying to build. But obviously, most of our work was disrupted, and we're still, in the process, because most schools have not reopened. Even schools that have reopened, they have only allowed higher classes, like, fourth year, third year students to come back. So it's still a challenge, but it's a challenge that we all have to face together, both institutions, employers, and people like us who are in this space. So we are constantly finding creative ways. So you think about virtual internships, you think about other programs that can still engage young people. Yeah.
Charles, do you want to weigh in on what they've said? Before I go to the next part, which we've talked a lot about, hearing about the challenges and that sort of thing, but I'd also, on behalf of the panel here, Charles, and our viewers, also understand what achievements that your respective companies saw. So, but just before we get to the achievements part, I'd like to hear from Charles.
This may not be the best thing to say, but I think one of the best things that has happened to people in the business like Alan's is COVID. Last year, I think we hosted two people who were in her space, the guys at Cora and the guys at Right Seat, same general space, and you know, without COVID, no one would have ever anticipated what the workplace would be like. Mm-hmm. And Alan rightfully talks about more companies were firing than those that were hiring. So it's without COVID, I think people who run that business of talent search, talent detection, and what have you would never have thought about being very innovative. Now, you and I are business owners. We appreciate how in our different workplaces, and I guess the same applies to Liban, how we've had to adjust inwardly. And then therefore, sort of a new business opportunity presents itself to the likes of Talent Match to say, you know, inwardly, how do you ensure that you're getting growth out of the person that you already have? Then where does that leave her students who have to find their way coming inwards? And so where I'm coming from is it's a very interesting time to be in the talent space. Now, speaking of Liban, I know Liban has been fighting this whole LPG war, for lack of a better word, Liban, but because he's a good friend of mine and we've done business together in the past. Their terrain has been very rough. Now, it is very easy for him to talk about the hundreds of hectares that are lost, and therefore you would sort of emotionally appeal to the people who are environmentally cautious.
When he said over 300,000, that number of trees that are cut, that are fell on a regular basis, that's alarming.
It's extremely alarming. Absolutely. It's extremely alarming. Yes. But as an entrepreneur, he may even tell you about other things, very underhand methods that people, competitors will come and take away people's cylinders and hide them so that they can be able to sell their own cylinders. And then you then ask yourself, where does that place the entrepreneur of tomorrow? You also ask yourself, in the new city master plan, for instance, it is becoming more and more complicated to get trucks into certain areas of the city, so then that therefore inadvertently means that things like firewood and charcoal may not get their way into certain parts of the city. But it also means that if you're building a commercial building or an office tower or a hotel for that matter, it's not economically viable for you to have gas cylinders and what have you, and then in comes the opportunity around piped gas or housing estates or apartment blocks and so on and so forth. So what then does that mean for the entrepreneur of tomorrow? You know, and this is where I come in and say that COVID has been a huge blessing in disguise for entrepreneurs. Yes.
The great equalizer. Liban, yes. Charles has pointed out some major challenges that you faced in your terrain, in your field. But also, and we can come back to that definitely later on in the show, but if you could also just touch on some key achievements you made last year, despite the COVID pandemic, with regards to the work Safe Gas Rwanda does.
Thank you so much, Diana. You know, last year, actually, the LPG space is relatively new in the country. We just had a new regulation that was launched a year ago. The entire sector was just out there. It was very, very, we had to find our own way. Like, actually, Charles pointed a very, very good, he mentioned a very good point. We could invest, we in entrepreneurs, it's highly CapEx oriented, so we could invest in the cylinders, the bottles. But again, remember, our business is never cylinders or bottles. Our business is gas. We just use it as a vehicle to push our product. Now imagine you have a situation where there's no regulation in place, and then on top of it, so all the cylinders that you're importing, somebody else who's sitting somewhere illegally refills them. It was a nightmare. So somebody else was making money off of your bet. Again, remember, there's bank exposure, there are many, many things. So again, we moved through that hurdle, had a very good regulation that was passed. Fast forward then, the implementation, the enforcement, everything was online. So quite frankly, and also government came in terms of, offering incentives. All taxes were removed so that they can push penetration. So again, the key things, the major building blocks were put in place. Now the entire sector is just ripe for takeoff. Then enter COVID. So now again, we have to fully pivot. We have to start thinking outside the box. I remember at the height of the COVID, one of the biggest consumers are hotels and restaurants. So all of a sudden we lose this entire market. So it removed around 30 to 40% of the market overnight. And some of it is struggling to come back, even though with the light opening. So, but again, to your point, Diana, a very good thing that happened is with COVID was that 30 to 40% that was lost from the hotels and the restaurant space, we actually recovered it from households. So the domestics, this is the situation that has always been in the LPG usage in homes. It was always reserved for the lady of the house, because there's this perception that it's dangerous, it's this, it's that. So the house help doesn't touch it. So you always have your LPG parallel to your jiko, to your charcoal. Now, for the first time, what COVID did was to normalize LPG usage in homes. So now they interacted with the product, they trained the house helps, they're making multiple meals. I remember our sales for the month of March was a double of a volume. Month of April was more than the sales for the entire Q1. So again, what LPG did to the what COVID did to the LPG space was to normalize gas usage in homes. And I mean, it's like having a switching from black and white to color TV. You never want to go back. So this is what happened. LPG entered households, and quite frankly, I don't see them switching back or doing anything. So for me, I think this is one of the biggest. And now, in terms of our investment with the plant, it just tied in perfectly. Remember, we're the only manufacturing cylinder manufacturing factory in the country. So this just tied perfectly at the time when we were wondering how are we going to push sales, how are we going to do this or do that. Then all of a sudden this thing comes, normalizes usage, and boom, we are clearly in business moving forward.
We always say on the show, like Charles also mentioned, but you say it with half a heart, because there's a silver lining. There's an element of this silver lining of this pandemic, because it has fast-tracked a lot of technology. It has fast-tracked a lot of solutions that we saw coming up last year that we've discussed multiple times on the show. So it's great to hear that, for your business, Liban in particular, it just give you a new market, households vis-a-vis all these huge establishments such as hotels. And I'd want to get to the next part of the question, which is understanding how you think of the future, how this pandemic has changed your thinking, the mindset, and the operations that both your companies do. But before we get there, I'd like to hear from Charles, just based on what you and Alan have shared with us.
I'll start probably a bit of a lighter note, but business opportunity that came up with gas. Usually I'm in the real estate business, and one of the biggest problems that you usually face when we are either trying to sell or rent a property is somebody will say, where is that outside kitchen? And when you ask what is it for, you get two responses, beans and isombe. Now, in my mind, I think with COVID and gas, it has created another opportunity for F&B, especially retail F&B operators, to sell pre-cooked isombe and pre-cooked beans. So they're there, they're fresh, they're frozen. You just come and use your safe gas or whoever it is, and you're good. So and again, that would never happen probably pre-COVID. So that's on the one end, but also. Specifically for Alan's business, and it's a little bit painful when you come across our youth, and everybody wants to make an earning from their first day of employment. Now, it's usually a bit of a problem, because there's a mindset that internship is for while I'm in school. Professional internship, yes, exists, is supposed to be paid, and sometimes the expectations are almost very close to a beginner's qualifications. Now, sometimes there's very little appreciation for proving yourself. Yet businesses are happy to pay. And I think this is what COVID has done. It has taught people that it is actually painful to stay at home doing nothing, and the Canal Plus runs out, you can't watch RBN News, you can't contribute to whatever you have to contribute, you can't, buy airtime and what have you. So, and again, that's one thing we have learned in speaking to family and friends and what have you, that even us, because our cash flows run down, the handouts we are giving to our friends and family naturally also run down. So I think for Alan in her space of work is also to continuously make people that advertise yourself in regards to what you can do. Even if you step into a workplace and somebody's just telling you, I'll compensate you just for your time in terms of your transport and you're coming here, don't be very hasty to turn down that opportunity. Yeah, which was the case pre-COVID.
That's true.
Yeah.
Alan, what do you have to say to that?
I couldn't agree more. I think Charles has clearly put it out perfectly well. I think there's this misconception, especially among young people, that, when you go out to do an internship, you are to be treated as a coffee maker or printing. I read on someone's t-shirt, I'm not your barista. And so I think the pandemic really showed young people that staying home is painful. But the other thing that the pandemic really did, especially for us in our space, is actually helping people gain the skills that we would have to go out and teach. So digital skills. People realize that, I cannot just send someone or go to someone and ask for help. I will have to send them a document and then we can collaborate. People realize that, I don't have to see someone to actually maybe set up a meeting and actually maybe set up like an interview or something. So these are tools that we were deliberately teaching them. They were part of our training because we want students to graduate with an end in mind, that these are some of the tools that, whether there's a pandemic or not, you need to be able to use. And also, thinking about collaboration, because some people end up with teams that are distributed teams, where you have a team in Kigali, you have a team in Musanze, and so you have to collaborate. You will not be driving every day to Musanze just to have a meeting with your colleagues. And so these are some of the fundamental skills that we were teaching, that we focus on, that the pandemic really helped us and kind of forced these skills onto people. You would see people just calling, how do I set up a Zoom call? And these are things we would have had to teach them in a training session. So that was really one of the things that I personally appreciated about, this whole painful process of going through this pandemic. A lot of people learned a lot of skills, whether they wanted it or not, whether they intentionally went out and tried to learn something or not. They were just bored, so they would end up on Coursera and they would learn something. And those are some of the things that we were trying to get people to think about. During the pandemic, people had a lot of time, so we initiated and encouraged them to read. Just pick up an article, read it, let's talk about it. And so that kind of, brought out a lot of the skill sets that we are already trying to develop among students and graduates, that we have to attribute to the pandemic in a sense. And also, just employers realizing that someone doesn't have to be in an office physically to get work done. I think that's one thing that all of us have realized, that, whether teams are, 50% or fully remote, a lot of people have changed the attitude about office versus out of office productivity, which is also great because now we can have young people sitting somewhere in a village with internet, and they can still work for a company based in Kigali. They don't have to come all the way here. So that has been great for us. So there's no, and for us, at least in our space, we used to have complaints that, I don't have a space in my office, I cannot have an intern. That should never be, I always thought it was ridiculous anyway, so the pandemic showed that it is a ridiculous idea, so yeah.
A ridiculous idea.
So it's something I've never thought about.
But it's incredible. When we keep on saying the silver lining of COVID-19, these are the concepts that we're talking about, and it's great to see, Alan, for you, things that you would have ordinarily taken you probably 6 months to train rigorously to, these students was done in a very short time span. So looking at 2021, this year, like I said earlier on in the show, a lot of us are hoping it's going to be much easier. There's a vaccine on the way. We're hoping that we'll have learned how to live with COVID so we can manage the pandemic, manage the numbers, that sort of thing, kind of get back to a semblance of normalcy, although I don't see that happening very soon. But I think there's a lot of optimism for this year. And saying that, for each of your companies, what are your expectations for this year in terms of, your operations? What do you look forward to? What do you envision? As well as what support, if you could also just share with us, what support do you think you may need, either from government or sort of accelerated programs that are designed to help companies such as yours, especially during this period of the COVID-19 pandemic? And I'll start with you, Liban.
Okay. Thanks, Diana. Much as we're saying there's a silver lining, quite frankly, there's some kind of an economic carnage. People, businesses, especially the smaller ones, really suffered. A big deal. We have a network of more than 400 distributors only alone in Kigali. And, they've been falling off like you can never believe it. I mean, the big businesses will be fine. If you look at your big grocery stores, they made a lot of money because eating never stopped. If you look at, but your neighborhood shop, your small restaurant in your neighborhood, your favorite restaurant, all of a sudden they're all going out of business. So a lot of work needs to be done. I mean, also tying it to the kind of work that Alan does, I think there's a lot of work that is required post this COVID. Again, the biggest issue that we're facing now is the uncertainty. We don't know when this thing ends. So for a business, that uncertainty is the worst thing. It's crazy for entrepreneurs. For our businesses, I think the kind of business that I'm in, it's Diana, we're talking about a 500% growth year on year. It's insane. The numbers are explosive. Quite frankly, gas is the telecommunication of our time. It is part of development, whether you like it or not. You have to make that switch. So it is just, Charles put it very correctly. The city master plan, everything is geared towards this. But looking at the entire entrepreneurship ecosystem as a whole, it is going to be super brutal. I actually was talking to someone earlier. I asked them, I never understood, like countries like in Kenya, why there was a lot of Indians who were dominating most of the businesses and these kind of things. And I never thought about it. He told me, listen, the population of Kenya in 1985 was only 19 million. Today it's 53. Every Kenyan that graduated had a job. You really didn't have to apply for a job. To some extent, most of us by the time of graduating. Now, all of a sudden, you have 54 million 2020, as of last year. You have 54 million, more than a double. Now, all these people, and all these people will be looking for jobs. You look at Rwanda. It's for the first time in Rwanda's history where the brilliant, smartest minds are coming straight out of college to starting their business. They used to be either absorbed by the government, civil service, or anything. But again, we're still working with the institutions of that other era. So we need to repurpose most of these institutions moving forward. I always argue that I strongly believe you need to put most of your resources in your brightest and best minds, which are these young entrepreneurs, young graduates, top of the top, who are actually going straight to start their own businesses. So it's going to be fascinating moving forward, seeing how Rwanda as a country navigates this terrain. People like Alan and their work, I think they'll be super busy dealing with this. Again, I remember our parents used to work one job until they retired. Today, by the time you're 30, you've at least had 5 jobs, and you really can't work for anybody. So it's really going to be fascinating. From a big picture standpoint, I think really entrepreneurship, small SMEs need to be at the heart of the transformation moving forward. I mean, I have hundreds of distributors on a daily basis. Most of them are young, fresh graduates who are ready to hustle, to make that grind. So I'm super optimistic looking forward. I think the future of gas is in really, really good hands. And I'm actually quite excited moving forward.
In as much as you said it will be a brutal year, you're also looking forward to sort of the trends with the youth and entrepreneurship, not only this year, but in the future.
Yeah. You know, Diana, Liban has just tickled my mind around whenever a senior civil servant loses his job, you know, there's infamous, in their opinions, you know, the cabinet meeting that comes up and says, Diana Mchisi is today the Director General of the Rwanda Carpets Association. And then you see that person on the streets after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, after 1 month, or you don't hear of them, or it's a friend or it's a relative, and the first thing you ask yourself, or you ask them directly, or you ask their relative is, what do you do these days? Where are you these days? Yet that person, in his previous political appointments, has been signing checks, approving payments, signing contracts of hundreds of entrepreneurs. Under normal circumstances, you'd think that because of their loads of public service experience, they are going to lend a portion of that into the entrepreneurship sector and sort of fill that gap of the novices who do not know what they are doing. But society, our own society, is very quick to judge these people who have been dropped from a point of view of not being reappointed to another position. Yet, in actual sense, their true value would be in covering that entrepreneurship base. And so our society is harsh to that extent. But that said, you know, I look, and this is again specifically to that gas space, and if you look at the entire ecosystem, you know, and if you have, and it's very refreshing that today, as Liban says, that the people who come out fresh from school, you know, a majority of them today are thinking about working for themselves.
I found that, I also
yes,
found that
if you're ready to fold your sleeves and get your hands dirty and be a distributor for Liban, there's a very high likelihood that a PS who has been dropped might say, but Liban is so-and-so's son. That boy of the other day, how do I become his distributor? Not seeing how much money.
But a younger person.
A younger person, yes. So we are generally very quick not to look at the bottom line, especially the older we grow in our calendar ages. But I think Liban has really nailed it on the head. The opportunities are immense, and just so I don't lose my point, I just wanted to emphasize around that entire ecosystem of gas. Now, Liban has just built a factory in Kanzenze. I stand to be corrected, but I think that's where it is. But looking at that person who has built that factory, it was started by somebody who identified the land. There was an architect, there was a contractor, building materials was spiced. Yes. Up to now, imagine when that gas gets to your doorstep and the cylinder needs to be replaced, and that cylinder may get old and it will need to be replenished, and the cooker and so on and so forth. So if you just placed yourself anywhere along that value chain, you know, the sky is the limit. So I think that's really from an entrepreneurship level, especially the youth, is just what lessons have we learned from COVID that have woken us up, and then place yourselves along that chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want us to, before we go to a social media feed, Alan, I'd like to get to you. We spent an inordinate amount of time on gas. I think it needs its own show, Charles. I find the details fascinating. Liban, you said it's the future, it's the telecom You alluded something, an analogy with telecommunication. It's definitely the future of, especially where we want to be when we're looking at it from an environmental perspective, but also from a practical and sustainable perspective. But very quickly, over to you, Alan. What are some of your key expectations in 2021, not only regarding the work Talent Match does, but also the results of Talent Match? What more would you like to see in this field?
Thank you, Dana. I think Charles and Liban did a great job about, building an ecosystem, really elaborating more about that. From my perspective, one is that people should know that the pandemic has not ended, and in fact, the impact and the pain is going to be felt later on. I don't think we have felt it, but I don't think that's the end of it. Even when the pandemic ends and life comes back, we'll still be dealing with consequences. Economic recovery, people who have been traumatized and all of that. So we'll be dealing with lots of recovery processes, which is a journey. So we need to be prepared for that. So my expectation is that everybody is preparing, whether it's in the space you work in or if it's health facilities, people should be thinking about, if this pandemic ends in the morning, then what? Yeah, so that's one thing. The other thing that as we try to recover, hopefully the pandemic will come to an end sooner than later. But as we think about recovery, I think the government has already put in some efforts. But we need to think about SMEs, small businesses and startups, because they make up the largest employment, and they also are the large. We don't have so many bigger companies. We have small startups, small SMEs that essentially drive our economy. So we need to think about, as small as they might be, they are employing 1 or 2 people. That one person, those 2 people are actually in employment. So how can we continue to support that ecosystem of young entrepreneurs to keep them at work? I actually, about a couple of months ago, I was having a conversation with someone in line with what we do at Talent Match, because we were trying to place interns in companies. And this person told me, the funding that we have, we want to put it towards interns who will be going to bigger companies. And in my mind, I was thinking, wait, but that beats every effort that you're trying to make, because the effort should be to keep as many people at work, and you cannot achieve that by just looking at bigger corporations. In fact, you should be thinking about small companies that could close tomorrow or the next day, and trying to sustain those and making sure that those are the people that we are also keeping at work. I think Libar mentioned this, that the bigger companies they're not going anywhere. Of course, they have been hit, they have been disrupted, but they will still be here tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. But how about that next door startup that just opened? These are SMEs that are, have just been trying to grow and scale up. If they close, if they had 10 people employed, 20 people employed, 5 people, all those are people that are going to end up unemployed, and essentially creating more problems than we have. So I really hope that both the private sector and the government will think about how to really continue to support SMEs and startups to keep them working, at least as they come up with a recovery plan for themselves, as they start to generate their revenues again. And then I think young people, my other expectation is that young people now realize that life is unpredictable, the economy is unpredictable, and so we need to continue to be dynamic and to adapt as fast as we can. Whether you are an entrepreneur or someone who's looking to be employed, you need to be constantly working on yourself and on your business to make sure that when something like this hits, can you pivot faster if necessary? If not, what else can you just move to something else? And so we need to be thinking about adaptability and thinking about how to continue to make ourselves better.
Thank you very much, Alan. We are now going to quickly go to a social media feed. We have the first tweet coming in, and this is from Tuisendje Jackson. If we can have that on our screens. He says that a nice topic of today, youth entrepreneurs faced main challenges last year, such as capital and mortgage, even if the government of Rwanda has put in place different policies to address those issues, like, and BDF, I think he's talking about the Business Development Fund, but the implementation needs improvement. And in addition to that, there's also the Economic Recovery Fund that also had an aspect of it dedicated to SMEs. We also have another tweet coming in, and it's from Vivens, who says that before COVID-19, it was difficult to enforce digital solutions to our local consumers and customers, but COVID-19 has brought the motive to our citizens to value online services. In 2021, I would recommend youth who are joining the ecosystem to take that as an opportunity. We have another tweet coming in as well, and this tweet is also from Jackson, and Jackson states that COVID-19 has taught us that we need to be creative and innovative to adapt ourselves to any situation that can accidentally occur. We need to think big and find out what to do in order to differently address our issues. I hope 2021 will not be like 2020. I think a lot of us hope for that. And he was echoing, Alan, what you said about adaptability. We have another tweet coming in. This tweet is also from Vivens once again. And he says that additionally, I'd like to recommend that young entrepreneurs put in place virtual and remote work systems for their services and product operations. When you do that, you invest once, but you generate repetitive profits with cost savings in operations. I can't agree with you more, Vivens. So the last part of the conversation is really Liban and Alan, for you to just tell us, the lessons learned, just very briefly in your closing remarks, lessons learned in your businesses regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as what message do you have for aspiring or current entrepreneurs? And Liban, I'll kick off with you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Diana. I think some of the key lessons that we learned is the importance of vertical integration. We have this, something very common with most entrepreneurs is this mono kind of a product. So people need to move from that and really look at the entire value chain so that you can consolidate some of the gains. I think for us that was one of our key things. We learned a lot in that. Thankfully, we had previously in the past invested in a logistics system, gas refilling system, distribution network, and all that. I know it is high capex, but mono products risk facing a lot of shocks in case of any. I think number two is we had to literally shred the entire budget, and we needed to repurpose our businesses. So it is important that you start from an empty, clean slate we redo our budgeting, we redo our everything, and again, we take it from there. And I think most importantly, Dan, I think for me, entrepreneurship literally to me it means perseverance. That is how I look at it. For businesses, for any business to first of all thrive, I mean the death rate is super high. The failure rate is very, very high. So you need to always persevere as an aspiring entrepreneur. There's really no easy way out. You're faced with many, many things all happening at the same time. So I would definitely consider this as the most important point moving forward.
Thank you very much. I cannot agree with you more when you talk about perseverance. If you join the entrepreneurial world, but I think I'd also like to add consistency. Consistency is key. You wake up in the morning, you persevere, and you consistently try to reach those goals that you set up to reach when you set up your company or your business. Alan, lessons learned in 2020, as well as what messages you have to aspiring or current entrepreneurs?
I think one lesson I learned is that you cannot predict the future. No matter how hard you try, today you think you're on the right track, tomorrow something hits. And this is true, it's not just limited to the pandemic. Especially as an entrepreneur, you're thinking about, I have a plan, I know what I'm going to do, but you really don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So it really taught me to constantly be prepared, kind of alert, be in an alert mood, and also to not be discouraged when things like this hit. Because when the pandemic hit and the lockdown happened, I thought, okay, what are we going to do? But surprisingly, it's during that time that we were able to close the University of Rwanda as a partner. And so it really just taught me that there is no, I think consistency, as you were saying, Diana, if you stick in there, stay consistent. If you are trying to solve a problem, really understanding that this is a problem that will be there whether the pandemic exists or not, and knowing that the pandemic is not going to be here, you know, for the rest of our lives, or that other challenge. It doesn't have to be a pandemic, you know. For entrepreneurs, you're thinking about not having resources, right? So the fact that you don't have resources, how do you work around that? And so it taught me to really think about different ways to work around problem solving, basically. And also really taught me about the value of having an ecosystem where you can tap into, because when the pandemic hit, there are some companies that were struggling to actually find young talent. They didn't have any cash flow and they didn't have staff because they couldn't afford. But because we were in some sort of ecosystem, we were actually able to say, you know, we have people who are willing to work from their home. All you have to do is just buy them internet. And they got the work done, and our students are learning, or at least they're putting their time to work. And so that taught me the value of, you know, collaboration and building an ecosystem. I think my final maybe word to people who want to go into entrepreneurship, it's not easy, honestly, but you just have to get started. That's one thing, because you don't know what you will face tomorrow until you start. You will not know what's ahead of you until you actually put your feet in there and test the water. So just get started, learn along the way, make mistakes, it's fine.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's been great having both of you on the show. Totally divergent, diverse businesses, gas, and you know, you're dealing with human resources, you're dealing with talent detection, and connecting the dots between the job market as well as students who are looking to enter the employment sector. Charles, closing remarks before we close?
Yeah. Just to echo what Alan said around, it's not an easy journey. You know, you wake up in the morning and, for example, one of the things that is kind of a taboo to mention in the Rwandan society is dishonesty. Mm-hmm. People are just not honest. Yes. Your friends, your relatives, your family, you know, people are not honest. And that's the biggest dilemma, because you will say, you'll hire a professional and then your family will put you on the cross and say, but our niece has no job. And you'll bring in the niece, and the niece will be the first person to steal your money. Then you'll give your best friend in school the contract to execute for you, and you know, that will be the first person to fleece you. So dishonesty is a huge challenge in our society, and it's a big impediment. And then there's also some surprise shocks. You know, you're just waking up in the morning, you've set up your business, it's post-COVID, and then Rwanda Revenue Authority has woken up and said 2021 moving forward, everything has to be EBM. At a time when you did your business plan a few years ago and said the requirements to have EBM is when you have a turnover beyond, X amount, 20 million, I think. And then now, you know, there's a shock. And to Alan's point earlier, I think that the only thing that is continuously changing is change.
It's change.
Yes.
The only thing that doesn't stop changing is change.
Yes.
Change
so there are all these shocks that are there. You can never plan for these shocks. The guy will come and PwC will come and do an amazing business plan for you, give you 5-year cash flow projections, throw in formulas of around how you're going to return your equity and pay back your loans and what have you, grow by the 500% that Liban was mentioning, yes. and then you have all these contracts in place. Alan said she signed, she closed the deal with the University of Kigali. Mm-hmm. But guess what? COVID has also taught us that cash is king. The first person who will not pay you is the person who owes you money.
That's true.
Yes. So it just shows you that when you're in a situation where it's extremely important to have cash, do not expect to get cash from the people who owe you. which is a huge dilemma because you would otherwise think that I have a lot of money out there, so I'm potentially in a comfortable position. So we always have to have that plan B, and that's around really the point that the monoline of business is not sustainable. You always have to have that plan B as an entrepreneur, and I don't believe the plan B is a job, like what most people believe, that I have a job and a business on the side. I think you should have a business and a business on the side. Yes.
A business and a business on the side. I was going to add plan C, D, E, F, G as
Yes.
well. The external shocks, adaptability, pivoting. I know that word has been used and abused during the COVID-19 pandemic, pivots and that sort of thing, but it's really about entrepreneurship and understanding how to always be prepared and how to easily adapt to these changes. COVID, I think, is just the first of serious issues that affected not only the world, but I think, you know, this just teaches us to prepare even further. And here I'm just talking about on a country national basis, national economy point of view, to really try and understand and value the aspect of learning how to adapt very quickly to these sort of shocks, because this, I think, is just the beginning. I would like to thank you, Alan. I'd like to thank you, Liban. It's been great having both of you on the show. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for sharing with us some of your milestones, some of your challenges, and your expectations for this year are very interesting. And insightful comments on what you expect this year to be like, the advice you have to entrepreneurs, as well as policymakers who actually make this ecosystem work. Charles, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for your insights, very valuable as usual. Berna, wherever you are, I hope you've been tuning in, and definitely we'll be having you with us next week. To our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting the show. Have a good night and see you all again next week. Thank you.